happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics. Today we got a reaction to the Ramones and their second studio album, Leave Home, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter and patron of the channel, Evan David. Thank you, Evan David. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out that Patreon link below or the Patreon link on the end screen. We could not do it without them. We're going to run the first few Ramones albums month by month, I think month by month. We did the Ramones debut last month. I'm going to link that down below. There's also a Ramones playlist, but thank you to Evan David for doing that. We're going to get into Evan David's research. Before we do that, I'm going to tell you, if you never watched one of our videos before, the music won't be in the video, but it's going to be at a Vimeo link below. So if you want to watch this with the music, which is really the way these things are designed, then check out that Vimeo link below right now. All right, when we jump into the research here, Evan David's research is always fantastic. He did the whole background of the band and how they came about on the Ramones self-titled, that first album, which is linked below, as I just said. So go check that out. Great background on the Ramones, how they came together, and obviously how that first album came together. But now we're going to jump into this album. Evan David says, rock and roll legend has it that the genesis of the Ramones' second studio album, 1977's Leave Home, can be traced back to the October-November of the previous year, when the Ramones convened in the Sire Records-owned Sundragon Studios in order to record the new songs that the band members had been writing in their own homes. Joey Ramone, for example, later recalled how, quote, I wrote most of the stuff I contributed at my apartment in Forest Hills before I left and moved back to a place in the city. I had no amp at home, just an electric guitar. I recorded it onto a cassette and played that back at rehearsal. We had better production, we were playing a little faster, and we had a lot of songs accumulated. We were in really good shape for that album. Indeed, and while it is fair to say that the Ramones' debut album has certainly not been a commercial success up to this point, to say the least, the widespread critical success that it had nevertheless gained since its release in April of 1976, plus the wider cultural momentum that had been garnered by the burgeoning punk movement over the intervening months, may perhaps not only explain why their second album was afforded not only relatively far more sophisticated recording facilities than they had had before, but also why Sire afforded the band a considerably higher production budget this time around. Now, granted, the budgetary increase in question may not appear to be all that significant in hindsight, for whereas the debut notoriously had a $6,400 budget, the second Ramones album was given a $10,000 budget instead, taking it from the equivalent of roughly $35,400 for the first album to $55,300 for the second album in 2024 terms, and that's when I'm recording this. After all, as music writer David Fricke once put it, nobody was going to give the Ramones any money. They were used to that. They weren't exactly getting paid a fortune down at CBGB's, where they famously played all the time, and a lot of bands famously played. It was like, get on, do it, get off, and they treated the record the same way, end quote. Nevertheless, and as the album's co-producer, drummer Tommy Ramone would later recall, the fact remained that, relatively speaking at least, the band were thus able to spend a little more time producing the second album and making it to a lot higher budget. We worked in a nice, comfortable studio with good equipment, and so it was a lot of fun making that record, very much so, end quote. The sense of the band having fun during the making of Leave Home, which was titled thus in reference to the Ramones having left New York to tour the world since their debut, including a particularly seminal 4th of July 1976 gig at the Roundhouse in London that undoubtedly helped to kickstart the punk movement on that side of the pond. It's also echoed, moreover, by future Ramones producer Ed Stasium, who was brought in to serve as an engineer on Leave Home by its other co-producer, Tony Bon Jovi, who, by the way, the cousin of a certain John Bon Jovi, of whom RTTC listeners may just have heard of. And I'll just jump in there real quick. That's actually the way John got a start. He went working at the studio where John was at as kind of a gopher guy. He was able to get some studio time and all that stuff. So it's a whole different story, but I have some knowledge of Bon Jovi. So he actually, Tony's a big part of why Bon Jovi exists. For as Ed Stasium later himself recalled, whereas I'd never heard the Ramones before, although I'd heard of them. I got in and I was like, what the heck is this? After an hour, though, I got it. I thought it was great. It's what every kid wants to do. It wasn't about virtuosity, but the feeling and the lyrics were so ridiculous. It gave me that good smack in the face everyone could use every 10 years. We desperately need one now. I don't know when this quote's from, but we do now as well. The simplicity, the power, and the comedy of the songs. That's why I latched onto them, and their personalities. They're very likable people. The songs have extremely memorable melodies, too. It was straight in, straight out, no messing. It was very professional. No one wanted to waste time or money. Joey was a workhorse. He knew exactly what he was going to do. His songs were embedded in his mind and soul. When Joey double-tracked his vocals, all the nuances were exactly the same, which I think is an interesting thing. I'll digress here from Evan David's writing for a minute. You know, people view the Ramones kind of, they just went in there, threw stuff down, but he's talking about they knew exactly what they were doing. Technical, spot on, dialed in. All right, Evan David says, as a result of this additional time and effort, meanwhile, and despite the tendency of some critics to regard it as essentially a Ramones Part 2 style follow-up to their aforementioned debut album, it nevertheless remains the case that Leave Home is not only an effective showcase for the decidedly quirky but nonetheless genuine strengths of the Ramones as songwriters, but is also clear of what might be termed the band's artistic progression since said debut. With even the band's most doggedly down-to-earth member, Johnny Ramone, once remarking how, quote, we recorded the songs in the order they were written, and we wanted to show a slight progression in song structure, end quote. Therefore, it's perhaps unsurprising that Tommy Ramone would later himself describe the album in question as heralding, quote, a sort of change-up. What we were going for on Leave Home was a sort of pop sound, because we like pop music, and I guess we're in that kind of mood for that album. You get these psychotic songs with psychotic lyrics with these happy-go-lucky pop melodies, and that's basically the Leave Home album, end quote. Despite such seeming grounds for optimism on purely artistic grounds, however, when the Leave Home album was finally released on January 10, 1977, it would quickly become apparent that, for all the critical praise that it would gather, its commercial fate was in fact to be even more of a flop than its predecessor, as while it did ultimately reach number 45 in the UK, by contrast, it only reached 148 on the US albums chart. Much of the chagrin of both Sire Records and indeed of the Ramones themselves, Joey himself would echo many observers both at the time and since by blaming the decidedly conservative, in musical terms at least, nature of the wider U.S. music industry and of the contemporary U.S. radio scene in particular for the band's by now ongoing commercial failures, remarking how, quote, we thought we had a lot of songs that should have been hits. If you grew up in the 60s, things would get played and be hits right off the bat. So we thought since our music was doing something unique that everyone would pick up on that. What really happened was we were so alien that no one wanted to touch us, and so we couldn't get played, end quote. On the other hand, it's certainly also the case that the Ramones did themselves no favors on this front with incidents such as the notorious Carbona Not Glue debacle, of which more later, which if nothing else would provide ample proof of their equally ongoing propensity to shoot themselves in the foot commercially speaking. You know, growing up in this time, I mean, I was born in 1971, so still not obviously firing on all cylinders when this thing came out. I was 5.5 years old. But it's hard in 2024, depending on what age you are, to understand the power that radio and DJs had. They were king then. Now, they were highly influenced by record execs and A&R guys and things that went on there. That's a whole nother story, almost a bribery of these guys, of the DJs. But they held such power. So if you didn't catch on with them for one reason or another, you couldn't make it, no matter how good you were. So nevertheless, and despite the fact that Leave Home often tends to be somewhat overlooked, even to this day, sandwiched as it is between the Ramones' truly iconic debut album and their third album, what many fans and critics alike regard as their finest ever studio album, November 1977's Rocket to Russia, which will be next month's reaction, Evan David says, it still remains the case that when it comes to the quality of its songwriting, as Ramones expert Donna Gaines puts it, quote, Leave Home showcases the Ramones' special gift of infusing everyday life experience with dark humor, street smarts, and pop savvy, then elevating it to higher ground. Working underneath each pop ditty was a serious subtext, a treatise on universal themes such as human alienation, longing, boredom, and fear. The Ramones caught everyone off guard, cranking brutal truth in 3-minute rapid-fire sonic bursts, end quote. Or to put it more succinctly, and as the Ramones' artistic director Arturo Vega once said, on Leave Home, every single song is good. Simple enough, right? End quote. As such, Evan David says, I look forward to seeing what both Sean and the rest of the RTTC community at large will make of its merits, both in comparison to its predecessor and his groundbreaking Ramones album in its own right, in the comments below. I don't mention again, the music won't be in the video. It's at that Vimeo link below. Let's jump into it. With the album opener, Glad to See You Go, co-written by Joey and Dee Dee Ramone. The snaringly dismissive breakup song was inspired by the recent collapse of Dee Dee's tempestuous relationship with his abusive then-girlfriend, former stripper groupie Connie Grip, of whom CBGB's owner Hilly Crystal once recalled, Dee Dee had his girlfriend who used to beat him up every now and then. She was a good-looking woman, but very tough, and every once in a while, she would take a swing at him and give him a good right hand." End quote. Rest assured, then, that the song itself is just as aggressively punchy as its inspiration, and as such makes for a rousing curtain raiser for the album as a whole. All right, I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Evan David. All right, glad to see you go. This Ramones, this reaction, I got to be dialed, man, because these songs are so short. You got to really, really be focused in, man. Great instrumentation, just like the first album. I thought the lyrics are great, especially when you know what it's about. Going to take a chance on her, one bullet in the cylinder, and in a moment of passion get the glory like Charles Manson. Throwing out Manson's name in 77 was probably a little dicey. Going to smile, I'm going to laugh. You're going to get to see a bloodbath. And then, of course, got to go, 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 goodbye. Glad to see you, go, 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 goodbye. And then the bridge, now I know the score. I don't need you anymore. Don't want you because you're a bore. And then he just, I need somebody good. I need a miracle. So he just kind of goes on and on about that, but really well done. And I love the song even more because I know, the background to it. Except we have Gimme Gimme Shock Treatment. Again, co-written by Dee Dee and Joey. This lightning fast and truly electrifying tune perhaps drew upon memories of the sharper end of psychotherapy that the latter, Joey, had observed during the brief stays in mental hospitals that occasionally took place in his younger years. Indeed, Joey once told a Rolling Stone interview that, quote, "I kind of fell in love with this girl, and every week they took her upstairs to the 5th floor to have shock treatments. They would strap her in a wheelchair. Before they took her up, she was fine. Then she came down and she was like a zombie." Man, the stuff that went on and that we did to people in this country, at least in the United States, is freaking insane, man. All right, just a good, fun song. The content isn't fun, but Gimme Shock Treatment is the guy who's just, life's a little tough, so he wants to get that shock treatment. Now, what I was talking about, strapping this woman to a wheelchair in Joey's story and taking her up in shock treatment, it's still used today. It's called electroconvulsive treatment now. It's still used today. And a lot of not only psychiatrists, but patients say it helps them enormously without the drugs. So never had it, couldn't tell you, but, he's wanting to escape here and get that shock treatment. Next up, we have I Remember You, released as a non-charting UK single in February of 77, written by Joey, and returning to the rich vein of bleaky romantic tunes that the singer had begun mining during the Ramones' debut album. Ramones biographer Everett True describes it as a haunting, hurting torch song, among the sweetest ever written, which is a couple of lines. The Ramones capture more emotion than 1,000 flowery poets and chest-beating stadium rockers like U2 will manage in 1,000 lifetimes. Wow, little U2 slander, man. Check yourself there, Everett. But Evan David says, ironically enough, U2's Bono would, in fact, perform an acoustic version of this tune at a gig in New York over 2 decades later, telling the crowd that, quote, "We got started on the poetry and punk rock of New York City. But more than anybody, what got us started when we were 15, 16 was the music of the Ramones." All right, a good song. There's 2 verses. They're really just considered choruses. There's just 2 choruses, and we just repeat them. He remembers her, but nothing lasts forever. And that is true. Like, what? 75% of the time, 90% of the time, if you consider the people you dated, not necessarily the marriage lasted forever. Had a little 60s feel to me, even almost 50s feel to me as well, which is a good thing. Next up, we have Oh, Oh, I Love Her So, another Joey written slice of tough guy romanticism, albeit with a far happier ending than the last one. This classic slice of doo-wop Americana wouldn't have been out of place on the U.S. singles charts of the early 60s, and as such is a good example as any of the kind of music that the Ramones, and Joey in particular, were now trying to resurrect from their own youthful memories to the much-changed musical environment of the late 70s. Disco, anybody? And yet retains a certain timeless charm all its own. Get the little guitar strum in there to put that early 60s, late 50s touch in there. Just a good song. He's with her. They met at the Burger King, fell in love by the soda machine, took the car downtown, went to Coney Island on the coaster. He's going to give her this big kiss for the night's through and make her mine. Oh, I love her so. So it just kind of takes you back to your youth a little bit. Thought it was a really good song. I'll get up to the 5th track, and a song that has a good story to it. Carbona, Not Glue. Evan David said, if not the best, and certainly perhaps the most notorious song on this album, this tongue-in-cheek follow-up to the previous album's ode to substance abuse, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, threatened to get the band into serious legal hot water as the makers of Carbona, a stain-removing cleaning fluid, which, according to punk journalist Legs McNeil, at least was, quote, definitely a better high than glue. Evan David says, although once again, dear RTTCers, please don't try this at home. Exactly. Warned that they would sue the band for copyright infringement on their branded trademarks if the song was included on the album. Now, I've never heard of Carbona, man. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore. I've just never heard it. with the end result that the tune was duly dropped from the album shortly after its first release and was instead replaced by the classic Sheena is a Punk Rocker. See next month's Ramones review on future U.S. pressings of the album and the far less well-known track Babysitter on UK ones. A shame, for while Legs McNeil may indeed be somewhat exaggerated when he claims that this propulsive tune was such a great song, so radio-friendly, like a song the Beatles or the Rolling Stones would have written if they were just starting out in 1976, with great harmonies and catchy lyrics. It nevertheless remains one of the pound-for-pound strongest tunes on the album, Evan David says, to which has since been restored on modern reissues, hence its place here. Carbona Not Glue, a good song. I don't know if it was a great song. I don't know if it stood out any more to me than Glad to See You Go or I Remember You, but a good song. And I looked it up during the song. Carbona's a huge cleaning brand to this day, and I'm a clean guy. Like, I deep clean stuff. I always have all my life, but I've never heard of Carbona. But, it's just first chorus, man. First chorus. Wonder what I'm doing tonight on the verse. I've been in the closet, I feel all right. Ran out of Carbona. Mom threw out the glue. Ran out of paint and roach spray too. It's TV's fault why I am this way. Mom and Pop want to put me away. From the early morning movie to the late, late show. After it's over, nowhere to go. Carbona Not Glue. Hey, Carbona, relax, man. They're not saying anything bad about you. You're just one little part of the song. And I will say this too, and I already put the next song up, but it got Carbona known. I'd never heard of Carbona. Now I know they make a ton of cleaning products. It actually was the best advertisement ever, right? So why would you go after them and copyright them? But now we get to Susie is a Headbanger. Apparently inspired by the 1947 film Nightmare Alley, this compulsive tune with its powerhouse drumming, as Ramones biographer Everett True once put it, it epitomizes the band's ability to produce tunes of simple, mindless, head-banging glory that do even the Ramones' metal peers Motorhead proud. On the other hand, the Ramones' own drummer, Tommy Ramone himself, once said that, quote, I happen to like Susie is a Headbanger very much because to me, that's like our country song. It's got a countryish melody, but again, with psychotic lyrics. Who's more right, Evan David says. I'll leave that for you guys to decide. But either way, it's a darn good song. I don't quite get the countryish melody, but I'm not going to argue with him. But, it's just a fun song. Great drumming, as Evan David said. There's not a lot to the lyrics. There's an intro, there's a 2-line verse, there's a 3-line chorus. If you count ooh, ooh, wee as a chorus, and a post-chorus, it's just a fun little Ramones song. Next up, as we near the halfway point of the album, we got a Pinhead, again inspired by a trip to the movies, in this case, the infamous 1932 gothic horror classic Freaks, directed by Todd Browning. According to Tommy Ramone, this Outsiders anthem was intended as a rallying cry for Ramones fans, and moreover as one which stated how, quote, all the freaks were welcome to join the Ramones. It was our way of goofing on the media for saying we were not too bright, end quote. It would soon become one of the band's most famous live anthems, with its Gabba Gabba Hey war cry being carried on a sign by a masked roadie at the climax of more or less every show for the rest of their performing careers. Yes, it is my firm belief that the studio version nevertheless has a freakish charm all its own, and one that as such I'd like you to please react to in this review. Either way, though, as Everett True once put it, this song is pure essence of Ramones, as I'm sure you will agree. Right, interesting with the other vocals coming in at the end. Pinhead, somebody who was dumb, kind of referred to back in the day that way, or could be referred to that way. I don't know, maybe they still do. I haven't heard that word in years and years and years, but they're kind of making fun. He's got a nurse he could go for, so he doesn't want to be viewed as a pinhead, as someone dumb. But there's an advantage when you're smart and people look at you as dumb, or maybe more so naive at times. I've used that when I was pretty successful in a couple different careers when I was very young to be successful in those careers. And the older people used to treat me like I didn't know anything, and I just roll with that, man. Because if you're really smart, I'm not telling you I'm really smart, but if you're really capable in a career and people think you're not, or they underestimate you, it's actually your best tool, man. So boys and girls, my lesson to you is if you're the smartest guy in the room, you don't need to tell people you're the smartest guy in the room. All right, we're halfway done with this album. We go to the 8th track, Now I Want to Be a Good Boy. Written by Dee Dee, this high-powered tale of someone who wants to be the good boy of the title, but can't quite make it. It's perhaps one of the weaker tunes on the album, but is no less entertaining for that, which in turn is perhaps more of a demonstration of the high standards set by the rest of the album than anything else. And that's what happens if on an album. I've noticed this in tons of albums over the years. If a song is just okay, but the other songs are great, then you think the song that's okay is really weak, and it's really not. It's just when you compare it with other songs on the album, it gets tough. It's like some of the Beatles' weakest albums. They're still great. Most other artists, they'd be their best album. So kind of that kind of thing. I'm with Evan David. It's a fine song. It pales to a lot of the other songs on here. Now I want to be a good boy. I don't want to be bad. Now I want to run away from home. Now I want to be on my own. That's it. It's a verse. It's 4 lines and it's repeated 4 times. And that's the song. It's not bad. Now we got Swallow My Pride. Written by Joey, this bittersweet tune was apparently inspired by the band's more negative experiences since signing with Sire Records, with Joey himself once explaining further how it was, quote, was about signing with Sire and about how the first album didn't skyrocket. There's a lot of things that were effed up in those days. We'd fly to some city where we're going to play, and there'd be no one there to meet us at the airport, so you swallow your pride, end quote. Ironically enough, Evan David says his tune would in fact provide the Ramones with one of the earliest limited tastes of their long-for commercial success when it was released as a single in February of 77. It ultimately reached number 36 on the UK charts, so they had a top 40 song. All right, Swallow My Pride. Thought it had a really good melody on this one. I mean, most of these songs do, right? Winter's here and it's going on 2 years. Swallow My Pride. Things were looking grim, but they're looking good again. Swallow my pride. Loose lips sink ships, they say. But isn't it always that way? Swallow my pride. In other words, don't complain. Don't say anything to anybody how their record company's not backing you. Right? And so then what happens? They just continue to not back you. Next up, we have What's Your Game? Another Joey written romantico, this time to a girl whom he wishes would stop pretending to be something she's not. According to Everett True, this almost wistfully melodic tune, quote, sees Joey's voice going into Ronnie Spector trembling overload for almost the first time, as sweet backing ooze had an acoustic guitar help tell the story of one more outsider, one more girl shunned by the pack. What's Your Game? It's weird, all these songs are short, but a lot of these songs will have, this one had almost 10 seconds of silence at the end of it. Most of them have like at least 5 seconds of silence. You add all those up over 14 songs. This album's even shorter than what it appears to be, but a good song. And I think a lot of people who grew up, especially through your teen years, all you ever want to be is like the other girls you see, and all you ever want to be, oh yeah, is like the other girls you see. So, you just want to fit in, man, is the whole idea of this thing. And when you don't, you feel like an outcast, and that's tough at any age. It's really tough when you're young. California Sun is our next track. This album's requisite cover song, Evan David says. This time of a surf rock tune, which had previously been most successfully recorded by a group called the Rivieras, whose version reached number 5 on the U.S. Billboard charts following its release in December of 1963. The relatively obscure nature of this tune demonstrates not only the Ramones' shared love of surf music, but also the fact, as Tommy Ramone once put it, quote, there's a lot of influences on the Ramones because we loved a lot of things. Our tastes were amazingly eclectic, all things considered. California Sun, I like songs like this. I think they did a great job with their guitar work. Is obviously fantastic, but he sings it quite well. It's just a fun song, man. It brings a smile to your face, which is what that surf music did, man. It's great stuff. Next up, we have Commando, written by Johnny and Dee Dee, and perhaps my own personal favorite song on the album, Evan David says, with this absurdly anthemic tune. As Donna Gaines once put it, quote, the Ramones' war movie fixation kicks into high gear. On cue, the live audiences during the song transformed into a black leather ocean of fists pumping high in continuous salute as Dee Dee's lyrics dictated a litany of demented rules. As such, Evan David says, I'd like you to react to this clip of the song being performed live at the Ramones' legendary New Year's Eve gig at the Rainbow Theatre in London on the 31st of December, 1977. A concert which would in turn shortly form the core of their equally legendary first live album, It's Alive. And Evan David also wanted me to mention, he wants to dedicate not only this song, but this album reaction and all future ones to one of our other community members, Heath Palace, who's a great Ramones fan, and who Evan David said was, he said his indomitable enthusiasm for what he often calls the Mighty Mighty Ramones has certainly been a key inspiration behind Evan David finally doing this particular series, which he's wanted to do for a while. So Evan David's a great guy. Heath Palace is a great guy. Two of my favorite guys, not only in our community, but just on planet Earth. All right, let's go. All right, what energy, man. The guitar work is just fantastic and infectious live. Great vocal performance. You wanted to be there, man. That was just a hammering crowd, and that was just a great performance. And, the song itself, really good. Really good. We got 2 songs left. We got a menacing title here. You're going to kill that girl. Written by Joey, this sinisterly energetic return to the darker side of 60s girl group pop is once more aptly described by Everett True as, quote, a 3-minute vignette of violence and betrayal that could have been taken straight from the Shangri-La and West Side Stories of doomed teen love, and proved that the Ramones had an ample grasp of song dynamics. Sections of the press took offense at this one too, mistaking the song's dark humor for misogyny. You're going to kill that girl. Just a fun sing-along song. Look, man, people are going to get upset about the dumbest. How can you get upset about this? It's just a fun song, man. Yes, he's watching from afar. This guy, he's admiring this girl and like, oh wow, I'm falling for her, and then this guy gets her and knocks her down, and he knows he's going to kill that girl. Like, it's fine, man. Everybody needed to relax, and everybody surely needs to relax now. And we're going to finish this thing off with "You Should Have Never Opened That Door." Written by Dee Dee and Johnny, this eerily compelling tune marks another welcome return to the macabre B-movie horror flick territory that the band had pioneered on their debut album, while also closing this one with considerable, if brief, aplomb. "You Should Have Never Opened That Door." I would have thought people would have been more upset about this, where he's like, "Mama, where's your little daughter? She's right here on the altar. You should have never opened that door. Now you're never going to see her no more. You don't know what I can do with this axe. Chop off your head, so you better relax." So yeah, of course, "You should have never opened that door." And then the call and response, "Open that door. Now you're never going to see her no more. Open that door." So I think one of the weaker tracks on the album, so I wish they wouldn't have finished that way. But I mean, it's great instrumentation, still catchy. It's not a bad track. Now we're going to get to Evan David's top tracks. His favorite tracks in reverse order are "Carbona Not Glue," "I Remember You," and his favorite track is "Commando," with honorable mentions for "California Sun," "Pinhead," "You're Gonna Kill That Girl," and "Susie as a Headbanger," which is interesting because a lot of his favorites are not mine, and I've got other favorites, which tells you how good this album is. My honorable mentions: "Swallow My Pride" and "California Sun." I know it's a cover, but I thought they did it so well. Faves are going to be "Commando," "Carbona Not Glue," "Oh, Oh, I Love Her So," "I Remember You," and then the opening track was fantastic, "Glad to See You Go." Now we're going to get to my overall score. Look, if you haven't watched the first album, I'm going to spoil it for you here, so sorry, but I gave the first album a 9.25, which is an insanely high score because it was the first time I'd ever heard the album. Really the second time, but the first time I sped through it. This is the first time I'm ever going to hear any of these other albums or really any of these other songs of the Ramones. But the first time listen to this, like, how much worse is this than the debut? I don't know. Not much at all, if any. So I'm going to be at a sky high 8.75, almost a 9. I went back and forth on it, of this album on first listening, which if you watch me all the time, you know I do not, I'm a tough grader. So first two Ramones albums, outstanding, man. Looking forward to the next one next month. Well, let me know what you think of this album down below. What are your favorite tracks and where do you think it falls in their discography as far as how good is it? Where do you rank it? For those of you that know the Ramones way better than I do. All right, thanks again to Evan David for putting this together and bringing us this series. Give him some love in the comments down below. And until next time, guys, I will see you.